Good morning and welcome to Downing Street. This is BBC News, I'm Shaun Ley. The headlines at 9 o'clock. The new Prime Minister Liz Truss is holding her first cabinet meeting right now after a reshuffle of the most senior positions in government. Ministers insist the energy crisis is at the very top of her agenda.
I think it's important that all the tyres are kicked, as it were, to make sure that we have a robust energy proposal in order, as I say, to set out that can be set out to help households and businesses, and details on that will be coming this week.
If Liz Truss announces that she's adopting Labour's plans, we welcome that and the country will welcome that, but we really haven't got the detail.
The Prime Minister will head to the House of Commons this lunchtime, her first appearance at Prime Minister's Questions.
And I'm Geeta Guru-Murthy in the studio. Our other headlines this morning. The mother of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell appeals to the gunman who killed her daughter to hand himself in. From today, free meals are being introduced for the youngest pupils in primary schools in Wales.
Hello and welcome to Downing Street, where behind me inside number 10, Cabinet Ministers have gathered for their first meeting collectively since many of them were appointed last night to the new government of Liz Truss. The big four jobs are held by the first time, none of them by white men, although obviously issues of class and education will be picked over by the critics. Still, Ms Truss has radically altered the balance of this government. There is just one minister attending the cabinet who was originally a supporter of Rishi Sunak. That's Michael Ellis, the Attorney General. You may remember him. He was the man who had the luckless task of appearing in the House of Commons almost on every occasion when Boris Johnson was under attack over those parties in Downing Street. But there's not much sign of party activity in Downing Street, a lot of time of political activity. Here's our correspondent Ben Wright.
Elected by Tory party members after Boris Johnson's downfall, Liz Truss entered number 10 promising a fresh start. But with energy bills soaring and a recession forecast, it's going to be tough.
I will get Britain working again. I have a bold plan to grow the economy through tax cuts and reform. I will cut taxes to reward hard work and boost business-led growth and investment. We shouldn't be daunted by the challenges we face. As strong as the storm may be, I know that the British people are stronger. Our country was built by people who get things done. We have huge reserves of talent, of energy and determination. I am confident that together we can ride out the storm.
The handover of power took place in the Highlands. Liz Truss met the Queen at Balmoral Castle in Aberdeenshire. After accepting Boris Johnson's resignation, the Queen appointed the 15th Prime Minister of her reign, the country's fourth Conservative leader in just 6 years. After flying back to London, Liz Truss was driven to Downing Street, where torrential rain had threatened to wash out her speech. Confident of victory for many weeks, the new Prime Minister had already planned her cabinet. Her friend, Kwasi Kwarteng, is Chancellor, who will have to find billions of pounds to help people with energy bills. James Cleverly becomes Foreign Secretary, and Suella Braverman is in charge of the Home Office. Jacob Rees-Mogg becomes Business Secretary, and Therese Coffey, one of Liz Truss's closest allies, is the new Health Secretary.
We've got priorities A, B, C, D, ambulances, backlogs, care, D, doctors and dentists, and we're going to work through that, and we'll make sure that we are delivering for patients.
Liz Truss begins this job at the toughest of moments, and she knows there is very little time to prove she can grip the challenges facing the country. Ben Wright, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, on my way here this morning, I ran into a couple of members of the new cabinet. One of them, Chris Philp, the new Chief Secretary to the Treasury, hovering along Whitehall, said good morning, looked very keen as he came into Downing Street, clutching that red folder under his arm, the one embossed with the gold lettering and the crown upon it. He is the new Chief Secretary to the Treasury, which might not make him the most popular minister among his colleagues over the coming months, because he's going to be squeezing as many pounds and pennies out of their departments as he can, because let's face it, the public finances, already under strain because of COVID, are going to become under even greater strain because of the combination of supporting businesses and individual families through the energy crisis. We're told we'll get an announcement on that within the week. Many expect it tomorrow, Thursday. He will also be the man trying to ensure that the borrowing is kept under control as he deputises for the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the new Chancellor of the Exchequer, Kwasi Kwarteng. And the other minister I ran into was Therese Coffey, who was her usual ebullient self as she emerged from giving interviews early this morning. And it was Therese Coffey who spoke about the effect on individuals of the energy crisis and what the government hopes to do about it.
Well, the Prime Minister set out yesterday on the doorsteps of Downing Street her three main priorities about growing the economy, tackling the energy situation and indeed the NHS. And in terms of energy, this is a combination of support to households and businesses, but also of supporting making our energy industry to make sure that we have sufficient energy coming through in the future. So both short-term and medium to long-term proposals there. That will be set out this week. That's what the Prime Minister said. You can understand that she's been Prime Minister for less than 24 hours while we've been working on plans in the run-up to this potential event. I think it's important that all the tyres are kicked, as it were, to make sure that we have a robust energy proposal in order, as I say, to set out that can be set out to help households and businesses, and details on that will be coming this week.
There's a minute of David Lammy, so well, that was Therese Coffey, the Deputy Prime Minister and Health Secretary. The Shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, gave Labour's first response to this morning, and he was asked whether he welcomed Liz Truss's promises on energy.
If Liz Truss announces that she's adopting Labour's plans, we welcome that, and the country will welcome that, but we really haven't got the detail. I think what's important, if she is going to freeze bills, is where is the money coming from? Is it actually going to come from consumers, from bill payers down the line, or is it going to come from the oil and gas companies who have made huge profits, more than they imagined, and can actually afford to fund it? So we're going to need to see the detail, I think, in the hours ahead. And second, is she really going to go forward with those unfunded tax cuts, which Rishi Sunak thought were wrong, and certainly we can't understand because they're not at all going to benefit poorer people?
That's Labour's view from David Lammy. Let's speak now to Will Tanner. Will is a former Deputy Head of Policy here at Downing Street. He served under Theresa May. He's now Director of Onward, which is a centre-right think tank, does a lot of political research. Will, thank you very much for talking to us this morning. How do you feel watching from the outside, having been on the inside, this new administration as it settles into office?
Well, Shaun, it brings back lots of memories from my own time going into Downing Street in 2016 when I went in with Theresa May. And these first few hours and days are critical. You saw yesterday Liz Truss giving her first address as Prime Minister to the nation. I remember Theresa May giving her Burning Injustices speech, and that really did set the tone for the first 6 to 12 months of her premiership. So I think Liz Truss's speech yesterday was an important moment. It very clearly set out her priorities for the coming months and years, and gave a clear direction to her government about where they should be focusing their energies, getting Britain working, getting a handle on the energy crisis, which clearly is the immediate priority, and ensuring that our NHS is able to cope with the growing demands of both the backlog and an increasingly ageing population. So an important moment, brings back lots of memories for me, but looking forward to what this government gets up to.
Yeah, and one thing that has been reported, suggestion that she is minded to shrink the policy unit operation inside Number 10. She's not sure it's been as effective, it is suggested, as perhaps the numbers of people working on it would imply it would be. What's your view of that?
Well, I think the intention is clearly to have a more agile and more political Downing Street that focuses less on managing every aspect of government and more on setting direction and leading on the key issues of the day. I think that is an admirable intention. Just the thing that I would caution is that events quite often take over, and when you're sitting in Downing Street, you actually have very few levers to drive policy across government. You don't have an army of civil servants underneath you. You don't have huge budgets in your direct control. Those are all controlled by either your Chancellor or individual Secretaries of State. So the ability of Number 10 to actually get things done and to see around corners as well, as you so often need to do in Downing Street, does rely on having good people in the building. And so a mass clear out, as we had yesterday, I mean, we have a clear out after every change of government, so that's not surprising, but not replacing some of those roles may be something that the new Prime Minister comes to regret in the months ahead.
Do you think this might be one explanation for her choice of cabinet colleagues? That if she doesn't have the machinery in government, and she perhaps is best placed to understand that, having been a cabinet minister, for 8 years now, she's the only survivor of David Cameron's last cabinet when he left office, when you came in to take over with Theresa May, that perhaps she needs people she really trusts around that cabinet table behind me, because she recognises, having been on the other end of it, that actually Downing Street's ability to control events from the centre is comparatively limited.
Well, so I think it's certainly true that in her 8 years in the cabinet, Liz Truss operated by having a small group of highly trusted advisors who worked on her behalf and effectively controlled the department underneath her in all of those roles that she did. But what I would say is that in Downing Street, you are performing a different function. You are not just the kind of leader, the kind of honorary head of the government. You are the person who is responsible for everything that happens underneath it. And so you do need an ability to get information quickly, to have all of those relationships across Whitehall. And so I think it's a choice, and I think it was an admirable decision or made with the right intentions. But the complexity of modern government is surprising when you enter Downing Street, and it's very, very quickly, most governments end up increasing the number of people there rather than reducing it.
You wrote recently in an article making reference to what you called the gerontocracy of the Conservative Party membership, pointing out its comparative age compared to the general population. Why does that worry you politically?
Well, so the Conservative Party has always been more popular amongst older voters than younger voters, and there are various political aphorisms about being Liberal below the age of 30 and Conservative over the age of 30. But as we've seen over the last few years, the Conservative Party has become more and more the preserve of older and increasingly kind of pensioner age voters, whereas much younger voters are increasingly turning away from conservatism. I think that should worry the Conservative Party. It doesn't appear to be just a kind of an age effect. It seems to be new cohorts of younger people are less likely to vote Conservative. But more than that, I think there's something very worrying going on with younger voters generally. In some of our polling that we've done last week, we found that younger voters are increasingly supportive of authoritarian government. So the number of young people, 18 to 34-year-olds, who support having a strong leader who doesn't need to worry about elections or Parliament has doubled since 1999. The number of young voters who support military rule is now up to 45%. So an extraordinary shift towards authoritarian government on both left and right. This isn't just the far right, it's also the kind of extreme left. And that should worry any party who believes in parliamentary democracy, which I would say the Conservative Party has always been the strongest supporter of. So I think that is something the new Prime Minister will need to get a handle on, and it's not something that's talked about enough in our politics, I think.
Will Tanner, former Deputy Head of the Downing Street Policy Unit, now Director of Onward, the think tank. Thank you very much. Well, joining me here in Downing Street now is the BBC's Chief Political Correspondent, Nick Eardley. Good morning to you. You've been here for hours. And you were here all last night and all yesterday as well. The weather has improved. The sun is shining on us for now. But there are storm clouds gathering, and boy, are they big, dark ones.
Well, look, they absolutely are. The entry is incredibly daunting, and as we've seen ministers walk up the street this morning, those new cabinet appointees, there are a long list of things that each of them has to worry about. But the thing that's dominating that meeting that's going on right now is the issue we've been talking about so much this week, the energy crisis, bills going up, what the government is going to do to support people. Liz Truss is currently setting out her strategy to ministers, what she intends to do to help people with their bills. We know she's going to spend tens of billions of pounds. The government's going to borrow a lot of money to help people with their bills. She's also going to present some plans to secure the UK's energy supply, she hopes, over the next few years. And then she's got a busy old afternoon, doesn't she? Because not only is she presenting to Cabinet for the first time, but then she drives down just a few hundred metres to Parliament and she's going to be facing Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's questions.
In terms of the Cabinet, what's Downing Street's explanation for its makeup? Because it is very noticeable, isn't it, that there is not a single supporter of Rishi Sunak's leadership campaign in the core Cabinet. There's, I think, one attending Cabinet, but full-rank Cabinet ministers, there are none. And this is from a Prime Minister who actually only had 50 MPs backing her when she started out. One would have thought in normal circumstances she'd want to show that she was kind of governing a broad church of the party, bringing in supporters from outside.
Well, look, the argument from Number 10 this morning is that this is a unity Cabinet. They would point out that there are 5 other people who stood for the leadership around that table this morning. However, I think you're right. I think that some eyebrows have been raised by the fact that Rishi Sunak's supporters were basically bundled out of Cabinet and a lot of Liz Truss's supporters were brought in.
We don't know if he was even offered a job. That hasn't been said.
I've not heard that he was offered a job. I think we would have heard if he turned one down, actually. So I do think that some Tories will be slightly nervous that Liz Truss wants people who agree with her around her. The argument I've heard from some senior Tories, including people that used to be at the Cabinet table, is that the more diversity you have, the more people you have challenging the Prime Minister, the better policy you get, and sometimes you avoid some of the controversies that Boris Johnson faced, because the argument that was made was that he had a loyalist Cabinet rather than a Cabinet that brought in all wings of the Conservative Party. I think the calculation that Team Truss have made is they don't particularly want people in there who a few weeks ago were saying that her plans were immoral, or that they weren't going to work, or that they were going to make inflation worse. But yes, there are some nervous Tories who think that maybe she's surrounding herself with people who are yes men and yes women who will agree with her. We're going to get the junior ministerial jobs still to come, though. We'll see if maybe they're a bit more diverse. But you're right, that is a concern that some have raised.
What about the policy challenge? Because presumably this question of energy and the crisis on bills that people are facing imminently, and some businesses we are hearing already considering whether or not they will continue in operation. Presumably that's one area where everybody around that table is going to agree, and probably quite a lot of people in Parliament as well, even if they're not in the Conservative Party, that something, in inverted commas, has to be done.
Yeah, do you know, it's interesting because I think publicly everyone will agree with this plan that we'll probably hear from Liz Truss probably in Parliament tomorrow. There are some Tory MPs who would say to you behind the scenes that all the borrowing that this government's prepared to do, well over £100 billion when you factor in tax cuts, increases to defence spending that are coming, all the NHS spending that's going to need to be done without the tax that was brought in to pay for it. They are nervous about that. They are nervous about what it will do to the deficit. They're slightly nervous about the fact it's universal as well. Some wanted a more targeted approach. But again, the calculation that Team Truss have made is they need to go big and they need to go quick. And actually, if she didn't come up with a universal plan that was going to last months, the chances are, Shaun, that in a couple of weeks' time, we'd be back here again because there'd be another crisis in the energy sector. The hope that Team Truss have is that by coming up with such a big package, yes, it's going to cost a lot of money. Yes, it calls into question some of the ideological things we've heard from Liz Truss and her new Chancellor about a small state. But ultimately, it gets them over this massive political hurdle and it gives her a bit of breathing space to do the things she wants to do in power.
Last thought, she has 2 years before there has to be a general election. December 2024. She used the date 2024 when she talked about accepting the job of becoming Prime Minister. It sounds like a long time, but in political terms, it's not that long, is it?
It's not that long to be able to say to the electorate, here's what I've done, with the exception of maybe throw a lot of money at the energy crisis. So yes, look, I mean, Liz Truss didn't set out a long list of particular targets yesterday. She talked a lot about, you know, the things we always hear about, infrastructure and roads and spades in the ground. But she set herself 3 challenges, all of which, by the way, are pretty tough challenges. Grow the economy, to solve the energy crisis, and to deal with problems with the NHS. Those are the 3 things she set out as her targets. They are all difficult. They are all going to be big challenges. She's put the core people that she really trusts into the jobs to deliver them. Kwasi Kwarteng, who's an ideological bedfellow, always has been. Therese Coffey, her political soulmate.
We shouldn't forget how important she is on a personal level, Therese Coffey. Should be as somebody Liz Truss absolutely trusts and a good friend.
Absolutely, and from Mr Kwarteng's allies, I've been hearing that he sees himself very much as second Lord of the Treasury. You know, if you see the number 10 door, it says on it First Lord of the Treasury.
Some chancellors do forget that.
They do indeed. I mean, we have heard before that idea that the Chancellor and the Prime Minister are in lockstep. But look, that's the argument from his allies. The thing that Liz Truss has always talked about over the last few weeks is deliver, deliver, deliver. We know what she wants to deliver. She's now got to explain how she's going to do it.
Nick Eardley, our Chief Political Correspondent. Always a pleasure. Thanks very much. And now back to you, Geeta.
Shaun, thanks very much. We'll be back, of course, in Westminster throughout the day today. Well, let me just bring you some breaking news that we have had from Liverpool, because we are hearing that 4 men arrested in connection with the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell in Dovecot have been conditionally bailed. Well, earlier this week, a 34-year-old man from Liverpool, a 41-year-old man from Knowsley and a 29-year-old man were arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender and questioned by police. A 34-year-old man from Liverpool was arrested on suspicion of murder and attempted murder. We've been told that the investigation into Olivia's tragic murder is ongoing, and police still need to build up a strong evidential picture so they can bring those responsible to justice. So 4 men who've been arrested have been conditionally bailed. The police investigation very much continuing. They are appealing to the public, of course, for information. Let us return to the political picture and the dramatic events of this week, with a new Prime Minister and a new person looking after health. And one of the biggest challenges facing Liz Truss will be the pressure on the NHS. With me now is Saffron Caudry, the Interim Chief Executive of NHS Providers, which represents NHS Acute Care, Ambulance, Community and Mental Health Services. Thanks very much, Saffron, for being with us today.
My pleasure.
We heard Liz Truss saying that the NHS is one of her key priorities. It's a massive challenge. What are you hoping to hear from the new Health Secretary?
Well, first thing to say is I was delighted to hear that Therese Coffey is so much in listening mode, and she's reflected back some of the challenges that the NHS is facing. But I think what we want to hear is that the government is really going to focus on workforce and making sure we have a really good long-term sustainable plan in place for workforce. At the moment, we've got a staggering level of vacancies across the NHS, 132,000 vacancies. That's jumped about 20,000 over the last period. So that's really going up. So we need to make sure we can keep staff in place. The second thing is,
how should that happen?
We need to make sure that we are focusing on pay, particularly for lower paid staff. So we know that many staff across health and care move into retail, hospitality, particularly at this time of year in the run up to Christmas. We've got to make sure we keep staff in place. We need their experience and their expertise in the NHS. So there's been a pay award for staff. We need to make sure that that's properly funded so that trusts can deliver on what they need to do.
Yes, and what about the visa question about bringing in staff from overseas? Because this shortage of staff is acute and it's immediate, isn't it? And it's in social care too.
Absolutely. So we need to see every measure taken in order to make sure that we have sufficient staff across all of the settings. So whether that's social care, domiciliary care across the NHS, I think it's important that we are able to employ staff from overseas. But it's also really important that we think about how we encourage people to come and work in the NHS and in social care. And you only do that by giving them a job that is rewarding and satisfying on the front line. So we need the government to really focus on on the immediates, getting people in, but also making sure that we solve this problem once and for all in the long term. And I think there's something really important about Therese Coffey also being the Deputy Prime Minister as well as the Health Secretary, which is she has leverage across government in a way that the previous Health Secretary might not have had. So she can really bring a lot to bear on that.
And sorry, that was your first point. What were your other key priorities that you want from government now?
So we want government to look at social care. I've already mentioned that. The social care situation is fragile. Without social care, without the ability to give people the care they need in their own homes, we aren't able to discharge people from hospital, from mental health services, and that is incredibly challenging because that's causing the pressures that we see in urgent and emergency care, the handover problems for ambulances. Social care really needs to be tackled.
And of course, I mean, all of this costs money. We're already spending about 20% of government expenditure on the NHS. Is this really sustainable with an ageing population, or will any government at some point, politically unpalatable it is, have to start looking at different funding mechanisms, charging the public?
I think what we've got to look at is the fact that we know that healthcare spending is rising across the globe. We aren't unique in this country, it's rising across the globe. But what we do have to make sure we do is look at the problems in the round. So we need to focus more on prevention. We've seen public health budgets cut to the bone over a significant period of time. Public health is the way that we stop people getting unwell in the first place and help them actually live better, longer, happier lives. So I think some of it is not about how we fund the NHS, but thinking differently about what we are funding and making sure that we focus on that prevention piece as well as treating. So we always talk about the NHS as an illness service. It needs to be a wellness service. We need to look across the piece.
But people will be worried going into winter. COVID hasn't gone away.
No, absolutely.
The ambulance waits, even for acute emergencies, are long. You can't get to see a GP very easily. We all know the problems. The government have got to come up with some immediate, quick measures if they're going to reassure the public, haven't they?
Absolutely, and I think there are some important things. The government needs to talk to trusts on the front line to make sure that they understand what solutions should be put in place, and that's making sure that we can discharge people from hospital into social care, that we support our community services as well as our hospital services, and that we make sure that we've got the provision in place so that we can actually hand people over from ambulances and get them back out on the road.
And just going back to our initial point, you're saying that basically, the staff shortages are acute and they're really important. How much more do people need to be paid to tempt people to come and work for the NHS from this country, or to keep people?
We've got to make sure that in the lower bands that we have got people on at least the national living wage, not just the minimum wage, but the national living wage. We've got to get people at the lower bands up to where they need to be. But we also need to solve problems like doctors' pensions as well. That's absolutely critical. Can't do that unless hospital trusts and others are funded to do so.
OK, Saffron Caudry, Interim Chief Executive, NHS Providers, thank you very much indeed for being with us today. Thanks a lot. Now, free meals have been introduced for the youngest school children in Wales. Reception pupils are being offered the meals from this month as part of a phased rollout to all primary schools by 2024. The Welsh Government says it'll help families with the cost of living crisis. The ministers announced the plan last year before the rise in household bills. Let's talk to our Wales correspondent, Hal Griffith in Cardiff. Hal, just explain how this is going to work.
Well, as you said, it'll start with the very youngest pupils in reception and a very small number of pupils who go to nursery schools within maintained schools as well. But as you said, it'll be rolled out eventually by April for pupils in 1 year and 2. And then for all primary pupils, the aim is by 2024. So Wales is trying to play catch up a little bit with other parts of the UK. As many viewers will know, free school meals are already available for pupils in years 1 and 2 in England and up to year 5 in Scotland. But according to the Welsh Government, it's a very timely introduction because everyone, of course, every family is looking at their household budget. So they say this will help people going into what will be a very difficult winter.
Be extended to older children too?
No talk at the moment of extending this to secondary school. I think the concern is that younger children, some of them may be going to school without a hot meal at any point during the day. And so by extending this, making it universal, not just means tested, that allows the youngest learners to concentrate, while free school meals are still available, but means tested for older pupils. Now, as you said, this pledge was made last year before the big increase in household bills, but also before the big increase in cost for schools of producing meals. So actually making it universal for all ages with a current cost of ingredients would be huge. And we know already some schools are struggling with the staffing of this because they think it'll be very popular, and some schools have to expand their kitchens again because they think in primary schools the take-up will be enormous.
And what are they doing to try and keep the schools to keep their own costs down? I mean, you can adjust menus and that sort of thing, can't you, to try and limit, excessive expenditure?
It's early in the term at the moment, so no schools have suggested that they're going to change what's on the menu because it's universally free, and because it's incremental, I suppose they have a bit of time, potentially 2 years, before they have to offer this for free for all schools. But yeah, it is a concern when you look at the balance that schools have to make, offering something that is nutritious and healthy and yet affordable. So local authorities, I'm sure, will be pushing for every penny they can when it comes to their settlements over the next 2 years.
Hal Griffith in Cardiff, thank you very much indeed. Let us catch up with the weather. Matt is here after that incredibly stormy, unpredictable day yesterday. How's it looking?
More of the same, Geeta, to be honest. Very good morning to you. It's a day to keep a waterproof handy just in case, because while some of you will stay dry with some sunny spells, shower clouds will never be too far away. So far, they've been quite prevalent around some southern and western coasts, also into Northern Ireland, developed more widely inland. Heaviest, most persistent rain has been across the northeast of Scotland. It's going to clear here through into the afternoon, becoming confined towards Lewis, so brightening up here. But elsewhere, just be wary. There will be ever-changing skies. Showers could come your way. They could be heavy and thundery, although fewer showers along southern coastal counties later, and in the sunshine between the showers it still feels warm enough with temperatures high teens, low 20s. Into this evening and overnight, showers northern half of the country, most will fade away, some mist and fog around. Further south though, particularly Wales, Midlands, southern England, more in the way of frequent showers, even more persistent heavy thundery rain, East Anglia and Lincolnshire later. Temperatures still in double figures of the teens to start Thursday. And for Thursday, we could see an area of persistent rain just slide its way up the coast of northeast England into southeast Scotland. Fewer showers western Scotland, Northern Ireland, but plenty of showers across England and Wales. And those across Wales have become slow moving later. A cooler day than today.
Hello, this is BBC News. I'm Geeta Guru-Murthy. The headlines. The new Prime Minister Liz Truss is holding her first cabinet meeting right now after a reshuffle of senior positions. Ministers insist the energy crisis is at the top of the agenda. Liz Truss will head to the House of Commons this lunchtime for her first appearance at Prime Minister's Questions. 4 men arrested in connection with the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell in Dovecot have been conditionally bailed. From today, free school meals are being introduced for the youngest pupils in primary schools in Wales. Let's go to the BBC Sports Centre, and Sarah's here with all the sport. Good morning.
Good morning, Geeta. Let's start then with the Champions League, where 3 more British clubs are in action this evening after mixed fortunes for 3 last night. Celtic's first group stage match after 5 years away ended in defeat to title holders Real Madrid. Our correspondent Chris McLaughlin was at Celtic Park.
The noise created inside Celtic Park on Champions League nights is special. The home side knew a performance to match it would be needed if they were to stand any chance against the might of Real Madrid. In the post denied captain Callum McGregor, but Real were rocking. And then the holders found the gear the home fans feared they'd been looking for. Vinicius Jr. got the first. Yeah, disappointing in the end, a defeat for Celtic. Will the manager take positives? Yes. Celtic were very good in that first half and answered some big questions about whether or not they could go toe-to-toe with Europe's best. Defeat in the end, but plenty of positives for Ange Postecoglou.
Chris McLaughlin there. While Manchester City began their campaign in style with a confident 4-0 win against But. And that is it for me for the moment. Let's get back to Shaun.
Thank you very much. Those are the sports headlines. The latest news here from Westminster is that Cabinet is bringing out Kemi Badenoch and Kit Malthouse, the new Education Secretary, former Mayor, Deputy Mayor of London. Good morning, Mr Malthouse. And Kemi Badenoch, who, of course, was a leadership challenger. She's now in international trade, which was Liz Truss's job, of course, before she became Foreign Secretary. Critics say, well, that means that one potential rival is going to be travelling around the world for quite a lot of the time. But I think it's fair to say it's a hugely important brief for the government post-Brexit. It's a new department, of course, didn't exist before Brexit, and therefore a role that Liz Truss will be particularly interested in. We've already seen leaving the Downing Street number 10 this morning the Armed Forces Minister James Heappey. He's one of those who's not in the cabinet but attends cabinet. It's a subtle difference. It allows the Prime Minister to kind of give favours to a few more friends and allies, even if they don't get full cabinet jobs. That's Chris Heaton-Harris, the new Northern Ireland Secretary, himself is formerly at the Whip's office. There goes Penny Mordaunt. Good morning, Miss Mordaunt. Good morning. Robert Buckland, the Wales Secretary, former Justice Secretary, of course. He's one of those who switched his support. He was a backer of Rishi Sunak and then quite late on in the campaign came out for Liz Truss. Underlines the fact, of course, that there is no Rishi Sunak supporter in the full cabinet. The Attorney General, Micah Ellis, was a supporter. He will attend cabinet. Got a few more. We still haven't seen the big beast of the cabinet. Perhaps she's keeping a small number inside for a closer chat. There's always that issue about how effective a cabinet of 24 people can be, and whether or not you need allies, closer circle of the big beasts, you might call them, the Foreign Secretary, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and of course her great friend, the Deputy Prime Minister and Health Secretary, Therese Coffey. While we wait and keep our eye on the door, let me talk now to Rosa Prince. Rosa is editor of The House magazine. You were, of course, a former lobby correspondent for a long time as well, Rosa. It's a strange thing, this period of the transition, isn't it? Particularly when it happens within a government. After all, some of these people were ministers before. Many of the people who have been deposed will be friends and allies.
That's right, and I think what characterises this cabinet is not just that they're relatively young and inexperienced, but also how many...
Here comes James Ley, the new Foreign Secretary. Good morning, James. And so there we go, another run of ministers coming out. There'll be plenty more to come. Of course, he has a very short walk, doesn't he, Rosa? Because the Foreign Office is just through that archway there.
Yeah, lovely new office just there, yes.
One of the best offices in the business. A few of the officials coming out as well. We were talking there, carry on, about this new cabinet.
This cabinet is characterised not just by who's there, but by who's not there. You've talked already about how Rishi Sunak didn't get a job, and neither did many of his supporters, just one there attending cabinet. We may see some more coming up as the junior ranks are filled. But there are so many big beasts now on those backbenches. I mean, think of Michael Gove, think of Sajid Javid. I think she's going to have her work set out, really, to make sure her relations with the parliamentary party are smooth.
And still prowling around Boris Johnson, who doesn't show any signs of wanting to leave the Commons. I mean, it's worth reminding people, isn't it? The exception of Theresa May, David Cameron and Tony Blair left the Commons almost on the same day they stopped being Prime Minister. Gordon Brown didn't hang around very long either.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, as you say, I was a lobby correspondent, and I remember when Boris Johnson was the mayor, and he used that exact phrase, if I am called, like Cincinnatus, to return to the plough, and by that he meant, well, I might go back to the Commons, but if the people want me. Does that mean he fancies coming back? Yeah. There's plenty of speculation around that he thinks he could return, that if it all goes horribly wrong for Liz Truss, that he could be there and be elected again, and it be another extraordinary chapter in this the story of the Boris Johnson life story.
And there's an intriguing historical precedent for that, isn't there? Because Ted Heath apparently only finally gave up his ambition of returning to the leadership of the Tory party when Margaret Thatcher won in '79, was convinced the party would realise the terrible mistake it had made. So, I mean, some people would say delusion in politics is not uncommon among those who've been leader.
Yeah, and then he went in for the long sulk. Do you remember that? He sat on the backbenches and he really cribbed and complained about whatever Thatcher was doing for the next 10 years or so. Boris Johnson may well...
There goes, good morning, Secretary of State. Congratulations to you both. There goes Jacob Rees-Mogg, and also interesting man at his side there, Graham Stewart, because a lot of people have been a bit worried about Jacob Rees-Mogg as Energy Secretary as well as Business Secretary, because he's a bit of a sceptic on climate, so he's certainly given that impression. Graham Stewart, the new Minister for Climate, who'll be working in his department, is somebody who's been supporting efforts to curb climate change for quite a long time.
That's right, and she also actually appointed Alok Sharma back to the role of COP president. If you remember, in November we hosted the COP summit, and we maintained that presidency for the next year. So she's kind of having it both ways. Jacob Rees-Mogg, very sceptical about climate change, very sceptical about those targets for switching to renewables. But at the same time, she does have people in the cabinet and around the cabinet who can kind of nudge her back on track.
We talk about the new cabinet. The other question, of course, is how she manages her relationship with Parliament, the House of Commons and the House of Lords. How important is that going to be, and how big a challenge do you think it is for her personally, given that she's not somebody who perhaps has been held in the highest regard among her parliamentary colleagues in the past?
Well, that's right. I mean, she wasn't even the second most popular candidate when we got to the first round of voting. She only snuck through right at the end. If you remember, it was Penny Mordaunt all the way who we thought would get through to the final ballot, which is of the membership. She didn't do that well, actually, with the grassroots, considering how we thought it would be a walkover.
Not as well as, say, Ian Duncan Smith, whose leadership didn't end well.
Absolutely. I think it's the lowest ratio. So she's here knowing that she does not have the full-thrusted support of all her MPs. So there's that problem. Then you've got the issue of legislation. All of the other MPs who were elected under Boris Johnson, they had a personal mandate. They were tied to him. They were tied to his manifesto. They don't have that same attachment to Liz Truss. They may feel a bit more emboldened to rebel on legislation. And then you've got the whole other issue of the House of Lords. Now we have a new leader of the Lords in Lord True, who is a bit of a hardliner, a bit of a right-winger. And I think the thinking there is that the Lords are going to need some management. There are any number of bills where they might rebel on. And again, they won't feel as tied to the manifesto, given that Liz Truss was not elected on that manifesto.
The Lords is a strange place, isn't it, for governments, in the sense that they don't have a majority up there. They have no power over the individuals, because once you're there for life, so you can't get rid of somebody. And they do what the House of Commons doesn't do, where they look at every single clause of every piece of legislation.
That's right, and I've heard many complaints. The magazine I edit is very attached to the House of Lords, and we have a lot of interaction with them. And they have been complaining that in the last few years under Boris Johnson, legislation was rushed and it was up to them to sort things out. So I don't think they feel in a particularly good mood about the government, and Lord True, I think, actually has one of the most difficult tasks in government now.
Now, one of the things I was most struck by listening to the long interview that Liz Truss gave to my colleague Laura Kuenssberg on Sunday morning in Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg was this quote when she talked about the way government has been conducted in the last few years. She says, to look at everything through the lens of redistribution, I believe, is wrong. The economic debate for the last 20 years has been dominated by discussions about distribution, and what's happened is that we have had relatively low growth. It's going to be difficult to square that, isn't it, with things like the levelling up agenda?
Yeah, with a levelling up. It was notable she didn't mention levelling up in her speech. That, of course, was the big hallmark of, or we were meant to believe, of Boris Johnson's administration. It got blown a bit off course by COVID, and then the idea was that he was going to swing back and really take a focus on that. It doesn't seem like she has the same priorities. It was a similar, actually, plan that Theresa May came to office with, saying she wanted to help the parts of the country that hadn't been reached by the Conservatives. Even David Cameron and George Osborne had that northern powerhouse. You don't sense that same imperative from Liz Truss. It doesn't seem to be on her list of priorities.
Now, she has appointed Simon Clarke as there's Brendan Lewis and also Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, is continuing in his job. Would have been hard to see him being moved. Really,
the only one, I think, who stayed in the place that they were in.
Now, that is intriguing, isn't it? Because how long sometimes Cabinet... I mean, to be fair to Boris Johnson, one of the things he didn't do was keep moving people around. I mean, one of the big criticisms of Tony Blair, he moved people every 5 minutes, and then came to realise in his second term that actually you need people who will stay and follow through. Boris Johnson didn't move very many people. A lot of these people will be trying to get to grips with the department kind of in the middle of a government.
Yeah, I mean, some of the people she's appointed were more junior ministers in those departments.
Yes.
For example, James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, had been a minister. So that's one way she's tried to get around that. But I think you're right. There are an awful lot of people in there who haven't had much experience of government, let alone cabinet. Chloe Smith, for example, has been really catapulted up the ranks. So, yeah, it's going to take people a little while to bed in, I think. And I was taken by, usually when there's a cabinet reshuffle, you keep a few people there for some consistency. And she really hasn't done that, apart from Ben Wallace, as you said.
Now, Liz, talk a little bit about Liz Wallace herself, because she's been people sometimes forget she's the longest serving cabinet minister now. She's been in there since the David Cameron days. She's held, until the Foreign Office, relatively junior jobs in government, but she's a survivor.
Yeah, and she's also someone who just seems to have so much self-belief and confidence.
Skin like a rhinoceros, one of her constituents.
Absolutely. I don't think she's got any self-doubt going in there. You can imagine some prime ministers walking in that door for the first time and thinking, oh, what have I done? Apparently, I heard an anecdote yesterday that when David Cameron came in, the first thing he did from Gus O'Donnell, who was his cabinet secretary, was put his head in his hands. I think the enormity of it all hit him in that moment. I don't think Liz Truss will have had that. I don't think her head will have been in her hands. I think she really enjoyed becoming Prime Minister and will enjoy it. I mean, most of us would think, given all the crises that are facing her, we wouldn't fancy it, but I think she really does.
Thick skin may not be a bad thing to have right now.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. You know, like Margaret Thatcher, she's a lady who's not for turning, so I think she's very much going to plough her own furrow. That's all very well if you come to the right decisions. If it's the wrong decision, then it may prove, you know, quite intractable. She doesn't like, during the whole of the campaign, people kept telling her, you can't talk about cutting taxes, you have to come up with a plan to deal with the cost of living crisis, and she just wasn't going to do it. It actually didn't damage her with the membership, but I wonder if that'll play as well with the wider country.
Rosa Prince, who is editor of The House, the parliamentary magazine, thank you very much. I know we'll be talking again over the coming weeks and months of the new Liz Truss administration. Now, an emergency session of the UN Security Council has been held in New York to discuss the state of the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine. They had calls for the immediate creation of a security zone to shield the facility from fighting. Russia is being urged to allow that to go on. With more on that from Kyiv, our security correspondent, Hugo Bachega.
This morning, we heard from Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, saying that he requested clarification from the International Atomic Energy Agency after that report was published yesterday. He said there is a need for additional explanation because there are a number of issues in the report. Now, the IAEA issued this report after inspectors visited the Zaporizhzhia complex yesterday. The report said the monitors observed damage at different locations at the Russian-occupied facility. Russian military vehicles and personnel are positioned across the complex. And the report also raised concern about the situation involving the Ukrainian staff operating the station. The monitor said the situation is unacceptable because these workers are having to endure high stress and also a lot of pressure. And the report called for the creation of a safety zone around this facility. Now, yesterday at that emergency meeting, Antonio Guterres called for the creation of a demilitarized zone. He's been calling for this zone for quite some time now. He said that Russian military personnel should leave the area of the station and Ukraine should promise that it would not move its troops in. But it's hard to see it happening because so far the Russians have rejected any proposal that it would include Russian troops being removed from this area. And Russia has been saying that Russian troops are there protecting this plant.
Hugo Bachega there in Kyiv, where, Geeta, we are told that President Zelensky has already invited Liz Truss, so maybe that will be her first foreign visit. Back to you.
Shaun, thanks very much for now. Let's move on to something away from politics, you might think. Researchers have followed and studied chimpanzees in the Ugandan rainforest, and they've found that they drum out messages on tree roots to communicate. The signature rhythms allow them to send information over long distances, revealing who's there and what they're doing. Take a listen to this, and a warning, it is quite loud. Well, let's try to decipher what that means with Dr. Catherine Hobiter. She's a primatologist from the University of St Andrews. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me.
What does the research show about how chimps communicate?
Well, we've known for some time that chimps drum. And there's these beautiful big buttress roots in the forest, and they found a fantastic big wide drumming surface to give these booming noises. And it'll carry more than 1 kilometre through the forest, which, you know, if you're a chimpanzee in a large community in a rainforest and you need to find each other and keep in touch, is a great way to do so. but we weren't sure what was encoded in those drumming messages. And what we've been able to show is that the chimps have their own signature rhythm, so actually their identity. So when I hear a drum, I know, oh, that's Alf, that's Ben, that's Frank. So we know who they are, what they're doing, and where they are. And that allows them to sort of check in with each other through the day.
And what is the difference in their drumming patterns?
You can tell, I mean, it's very much like the kind of way in which we describe musical rhythm. So you've got some drummers who are like Ben, he's our alpha male in Waibira. He's a very regular sort of 4/4 beat rock drummer, kind of straight down the line kind of guy. And then you've got the chimps like Tristan or like Zalu, who are much more freeform, lots of beats, little extra flourishes in there. And so, yeah, you can tell each one has their own signature way of putting the rhythm and the timing together.
And when they are drumming, are they just literally saying, I am here, or could there be more encoded within those patterns?
We do know that we can also tell where they are and what they're doing. So we know whether or not they're traveling, which when they have these signatures, one of the things that was the most interesting finding for us is that sometimes when they drum, they don't put their individual signatures in there. So for example, when they're displaying, and there might be sometimes when you're a male chimpanzee, you want to show off how strong you are, but you don't necessarily want all of the other male chimps who might be eavesdropping to know who it is who's sort of displaying to the ladies at that point. So the chimps seem to be able to encode not just who's there, but also what they're doing at the same time.
So it is a really sophisticated form of communication. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's great. It's really flexible, and flexibility is something that always gets us excited because that's one of the absolutely key characteristics of human language.
So you could recognise specifically who was making which sounds where. Is it possible that, you know, even more subtle messages are within these drumming patterns that we could yet find out?
Definitely. So we're just at the surface of this. And one of the next steps for us, for example, is to look at different groups of chimpanzees and see whether or not there might be something like a local drumming style or culture that tells you not just who's drumming, but also their group identity. So, oh, that's Frank, but Frank's a Sonso chimp. And being able to distinguish different groups in the forest might also be really useful for these chimpanzees. They're quite territorial. So you don't want to make the mistake of going towards individuals if they're from the wrong community.
Just funny, I mean, it is extraordinary to read this. Are we kind of massively underestimating the complexity of the animal kingdom overall, wider than chimpanzees?
I mean, I think so. And I think every time that we draw a line in the sand and we say humans are special, we're different from other species because we do this, the minute that line's in the sand, very quickly, if we really start to look at it, we can find other species that have similar capacities. And humans are very different in the way that we communicate, but we're not more complex, we're not more special, we're just, each species has its own way of doing things. And I think often it's been our ability to recognize that that's really having to do the catch-up job.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Dr. Catherine Herberter. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, millions of people in England and Scotland have been invited to book their autumn COVID booster jabs, with shots being offered to those at the highest risk first. Care home residents in Devon were some of the first to receive it. The Scott Bingham reports.
A weekly session to raise the spirits, and some residents were up and dancing, whilst others rolled up their sleeves to get their latest booster jab.
You've just had your jab.
Yes.
How was it?
Painless. Yeah, no trouble at all. Didn't feel a thing.
It's a matter of, could be a case of life or death, couldn't it? That's not summing it up too harshly, but it is, isn't it? It can be.
I think it is important that we carry on having any immunisations that are recommended and any of the boosters for residents and for staff, because it's still out there and we've still got to protect them. They are very vulnerable.
This is one of 700 care homes across England in the first wave of the NHS's autumn COVID vaccine booster programme.
We have contacted the care homes that we're going to come out to visit, and they're all booked in over the next week or two, and we're just working our way round them with the teams going out and about, doing as many as we can, as quickly as we can. Our emphasis being to protect the most vulnerable as soon as possible, care homes and housebound patients being in that category.
The residents and staff here at Honiton Manor are among the first 1.6 million people to be eligible this week for the autumn booster. They'll also be some of the first to receive the bivalent vaccine.
The UK is the first country to approve Moderna's bivalent, which targets both the Omicron and original COVID variants. It's one of 4 vaccines approved for the autumn booster. And a further 4 million people will be able to book their jabs from next week. They include the over 75s and those with weakened immune systems, as well as health and social care staff who don't work in care homes. But people are being urged to wait for their invitation before booking an appointment. Scott Bingham, BBC News.
Back to Westminster very soon. First, let's catch up with the weather. Here's Matt.
Hello. Once again, a few of you will stay dry through today, but once again, we've got some big billowing clouds that have started to build up, and it's going to be another day of sunshine and thundery showers with those ever-changing skies. The more persistent rain we've seen in northern parts of Scotland, well, that will continue to fade away into the afternoon, so brightening up to the northeast certainly. And with winds lighter across southern Scotland into northern England, the showers here are fairly slow moving, and that does mean there'll be areas where avoid the showers altogether. But Northern Ireland, down across Wales, Midlands, parts of southern England, the showers will come and go through the day, pushed along by a strong breeze, especially to the southwest. Although I reckon down these southern coastal counties, even though it'll be blustery, there'll be fewer showers during the afternoon. Temperatures this afternoon a little bit down on yesterday, but still warm enough in those sunnier moments. And it'd be a warm enough night again tonight, with the wind still coming in from a generally southeasterly direction. Frequent showers, though, across the southern half of England and Wales. Some rumbles of thunder. More persistent rain potentially for East Anglia and Lincolnshire later. Northern half of the UK, fewer showers, but greater chance of some mist and fog patches to take us into Thursday. Now, the big chart for Thursday still shows the very same area of low pressure has been with us all week, but now it's starting to move eastwards. And in doing so, the centre of the low pressure, where the winds are lightest, will pass across Wales through the day. So here, showers which will move through the skies quite quickly in the morning will become slow moving. Could drop quite a bit of rainfall for 1 or 2. Frequent, fast moving showers across the south, developing more widely as we go through the day, but more persistent rain starting in Yorkshire, pushing into northeast of England, southeast Scotland later. The north and west of Scotland, Northern Ireland, actually not a bad day. Fewer showers, many places will be dry. Cooler though than today, and cooler still across parts of Scotland as we go into Friday. Strong easterly winds, persistent rain through central southern areas, extending also into Northern Ireland. England and Wales, it's still that story of sunshine and for some fairly slow moving heavy and thundery showers. A bit of warmth in the sunshine between the showers, but overall starting to turn cooler to see the week out. And as we go into the weekend, as that air of low pressure finally departs our shores, we're almost in between weather systems. The winds fall light ahead of rain late on Sunday, and that does mean through Saturday and Sunday it'll be a bit cooler by night. There'll be some fairly dense patches of fog and mist around first thing in the morning, but actually fewer showers by day and a little bit of sunshine through the afternoon. See you later.
Morning. Come and have a seat. Now, of course, I'm not going to go easy on you. There are some really big questions we've got to try and get answers to this morning. But I'll be fair, and we just want to hear what you've got to say. So, shall we get on with it?
We're rolling.
Here we go. Join me to hear from the biggest names inside and outside politics.
Sunday with Laura Koonsberg. Sundays at 9 on BBC One and iPlayer.
You experienced racism. Why didn't you walk away?
That's a really good question.
You're a politician.
I'm not a politician. I don't read the polls.
Yeah,
I
are
sit
a
in Judiciary
politician.
Committee. No,
you are very definitely a politician.
No.
The very fact that there were not people who looked like you.
Hold on. I'm only halfway through my answer.
Is secret schooling happening across Afghanistan for girls?
It does.
You simply can't assume that.
Actually, yes, you can.
Hard Talk. Watch on BBC iPlayer.